extra lumpy this morning.
Yes. So we got a little problem with this BMW where when you first start it up, it surges pretty bad. And you can see the tach is bouncing up and down. Not a lot, but it's definitely there. The problem, you can feel it when you lift the RPMs. You see the tach. I'm just trying to raise it up a little bit right now, and you can also feel it when you're driving the car. You can't really see it on the tach, but you can certainly feel it where the car's speeding up, slowing down, speeding up, slowing down. At a light throttle under 3,000 RPM, where it'll surge up and down. Doesn't seem to make any difference if when it warms up. Under a light throttle, it'll still surge. The idle will clean up as the car gets warmer, but we're going to take a look and see what we can find. Got the car in the shop and on the rack right now, and I'm going to start with some of the basics of what can affect surging. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull my air filter, take a look at it. That'll give me access to my intake manifold down through here, and I will hook up our smoke machine and see if we've got any vacuum leaks or anything obvious there. I have scanned the computer. It came back with one fault code, one of the Van Off solenoids. It's not triggering a check engine light at this time. So we'll look at that a little bit deeper. I don't think that'll cause our surging. The fault code was recorded about 50 miles ago, and while the engine was under load and driving at around 2,500 RPM. So I'm just adding a little bit more fluid to our smoke machine, and all this is like castor oil. When it's heated on the coil in there, it's going to produce a really light smoke. And then we're going to push that smoke into the intake system using compressed air. And if there's any leaks anywhere, they should show us where that leak's coming from, as we'll see smoke coming out of the intake system. Because yeah, I saw that same stuff, but if it's coming out somewhere, you'll see a constant stream of smoke coming. I don't see anything. Maybe what we should look at doing is putting it in a different spot. Maybe it's not getting past the throttle butterfly. Our smoke test didn't show up any leaks on the intake manifold, though I'm a little concerned that maybe it wasn't making it past the throttle butterfly if it's all carboned up. So I'm going to take that pipe off there and take a look in, make sure that the throttle plate has enough space for me to get air pressure past it, and then maybe do the test one more time. No, it's not sealed up, that's for sure.
Oh, so smoke will go past.
Yeah. We've just completed our smoke test, didn't find any intake leaks, everything looked good, everything sealed up. I've scanned the system for codes, and there were no codes present on the system. However, I was working around the coil area and looking at my VVT control. The way the throttle works on these is they actually change the idle speed and the throttle speed by varying the amount of lift on the valve. So they change actually how much the valve opens and closes. And what I did is I went ahead and I pulled out the VVT motor to take a look and see if there was anything I could see and check the connections. When it put it back in, I actually had a hard misfire. And that misfire turned out to be a coil on number 5 cylinder. When I moved the coil from number 5 to number 2, the misfire transferred. Now, I didn't have any codes prior to that, but it also does make a little bit of sense because first thing in the morning when you'd started up, that surge felt like a hard misfire, like it was dropping a cylinder. The car runs and drives much better. I transferred a set of coils, just a good U set that I had just to test the issue, even though the coils that were in it were brand new, which just kind of leads you to remember that just because it's new doesn't mean that it's going to be working. So the next thing that I did is I checked my fuel pressure, and the way that we do that is right here is a port, and you unscrew this little valve right there. It's just a little Schrader valve, just like it is on a tire. So to release this, I'm going to take the Schrader valve off and just set the cap to the side. I'm going to use my fuel pressure gauge just because it has a drain feature on it. When you screw it in, it's going to have some pressure and lose some fuel. And you screw in, and I checked my fuel pressure. Everything was good there. Had about 85 pounds. It was steady. When I shut the engine off, it held pressure. So everything was working correctly on that side of things. So I've also looked at all of my other electrical connections. While I had my scan tool up, I was reading the mass airflow sensor. It was responding to changes in airflow. So everything there was working the way it should do. Now, this engine has some known issues with carbon buildup on the backs of the valves. And being that the original PCV valve inside the valve cover had failed when I first bought this car, it was putting a lot of oil into the intake system. So what I'm going to do now is remove the intake system and take a look at the back of the intake valves. If we've got a lot of carbon buildup on those valves, what'll happen is as the engine computer is telling the valves to open a certain amount, if that carbon is restricting the airflow, that'll give us a slight surge in the way the car drives. So with the intake manifold off, things actually look really clean. No issues down there whatsoever, which is going to eliminate the possible cause of an excessive carbon buildup. After I replaced the coils and I drove it, the car drove a lot better and the surge was considerably less. So I think the biggest issue was more so the partial misfire on cylinder number 5, even though it didn't record a code. And that's what was really making the RPM drop, that sudden like 50, 60 RPM drop. And I'm just going to keep monitoring it. I think for now, maybe an injector service would help, though I'm not ready to have the car down for that long. And we'll just keep looking. We've been working through on our BMW 328 iX with our surging issue, and we've done a lot of things. We've smoke checked the intake manifold, didn't find any leaks at all. We've actually pulled the intake manifold and looked at the valve. I have cleared the check engine light problems. That turned out to be a bad intake variable cam solenoid. It was a brand new solenoid, but proof that brand new parts don't always work. And the car is running pretty nice, but it still has a slight surge. So with everything that I have done, and I can't find any other issues, I'm not setting any codes, I've put quite a few miles on it, everything's doing what it's supposed to be doing. The only thing really left for me to focus my attention on is going to be the air mass meter, which is this part that is located down here. So this is an air mass meter, or a hot wire, and what this does, it does a couple of things. One, it senses the incoming air temperature and relays that back to the control unit, but what it does primarily is sense the mass of air flowing through the intake system by heating a wire inside of this, and then it measures how many amps it takes to keep that wire heated to a certain number. Now, as airflow increases over that sensor, the wire is cooled quicker and it takes more amps to heat it, and that feeds that information back to the control unit that then says, hey, inject this much fuel. So I have tested the one that is in the car, and it is functioning to the point where I can see it change. If I rev the motor, we see a change on the graph. If I disconnect it, it'll set a fault code. So it is working, but what can happen is over time, these air mass meters can become contaminated with debris and things that are being drawn through the intake system. Now, what this does is it can insulate the wire, and it can change its response time, and it can change the amount of amps that it takes to drive that wire, which isn't outside of the parameters of the engine computer, but may be causing our problem. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to remove our original air mass meter down here, and I'm going to install our new air mass meter. And before we do that, I'm going to take a couple of comparison readings with my scan tool just to see what numbers this is producing, what numbers this is producing, and then see what effect it has. Alright, so I am using the Bavarian Technic software, and what we're looking at here is a couple of things. I have my air temperature, which is 27 degrees, that's going to be my red line, and that's my ambient air coming in. And then this number here is 14.4 kilograms per hour. That's my air mass density, and that's the blue line here. So I can see that the air mass meter is working. It's measuring some. We've got occasional spikes. Right now the car's actually idling pretty good, but it is warm. I have run it in the shop for a little bit, chasing some other issues. And then when I rev the engine, we can see our airflow jumps up, our intake air drops down, and we're getting a response from the air mass. When I let go, you can see it immediately drops back down. So the air mass meter that is in there is responding. But what I feel it's happening for the surge, and I won't know till really tomorrow morning when I drive the car, will be, I think the responses are slower, and possibly it's not reading the right amount of air. Maybe there's some air intake discrepancies that it's got, or maybe we're going to see a number here that's a little bit different, because we're fairly consistent at idle at 13.8 to like 14.8 kilograms of air per hour. Changing the sensor on these is really easy. We've got our electrical plug that's got a little locking tab on the top. I'm just going to carefully pry that up, and it's already cracked, but that's okay. We get a new one on the new air mass meter. Slide our plug back, and there's two, I believe these are T25 or T27 Torx. And then there's an O-ring seal in there. Pops out, there's my air mass meter. Everything looks fine. Let's drop in our new one and see what we get. This one looks like an original Siemens VDO. So I'm just going to slide in the new sensor. Okay, so when you tighten these up, be careful you don't over tighten them. They are into plastic so they can strip. And then our electrical plug, pretty straightforward. Line it up and just make sure it's seated all the way in. And that's it for changing the sensor. Now before we run it, we need to clear the parameters in the control unit. Basically what it's going to do is cause it to relearn its fuel curves and its air intake curves. So we're going to do that first, and then we'll start the car up and run it. So I'm in my scan information again connected to the car, and there's a few things that I want to reset. I want to reset my air control adjustments. I'm also going to reset my fuel air adaptation, and this is going to be one of the most important ones because this is what it's basing the numbers that it's getting from the air mass meter and comparing those to what it learns when we drive. And let's see if there's anything else here we need to reset. Nope, that's pretty much about it. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit reset there. And what I'm doing is I'm watching it here, and then it'll say command sent successfully once it's done. I'm going to reset the intake manifold adaptation as well. And that's for the flapper valve that's inside the intake manifold. I just want to reset anything that can be controlled or have a bearing on our fuel and air mixtures. And there's our air mass meter. And let's look at the same two numbers. So we're going to bring up inlet air. It's about the same, 27 degrees. And our air mass meter. Huge difference there. Okay, so I'm at idle speed right now, and we are reading 23, 24 kilograms of air per hour. We may be a little bit higher on the idle, so that may be up a little bit higher. But that's a huge difference from the other one. So if we give it a rev, good response. So there's 3,000 RPM. So we can see we got a big difference with the amount of air that it's seeing coming into the car. So the next thing to do is drive it. Well, it looks like my idle's settling down. Still higher, we're still averaging that 16, 17 kilograms of air per hour. So that's a big difference over the old air mass meter. So right now we're just rolling out to kind of see how the car performs, see if anything really sticks out. Usually when it's hot it doesn't surge too bad. So far everything feels good. And also give it a chance to kind of start relearning its parameters as well, because it's going to be looking at that sensor and comparing temperatures and throttle movements. Normally when I have a light throttle like I've got right now, I would get a very slight surge back and forth, but so far so good. First thing in the morning is when it really, especially on a cold morning, and our temperatures right now are going to be in the 20s in the morning when I started up. The warmer the outside air got, the better the surge got, but when it was cold and ambient temperatures below freezing, it would really notice that surge. So it's the next day. We left the car out overnight. The temperature on the thermometer that we have in our shop says it's 22 degrees outside. The car may say it's a little bit different. Sun's just starting to come up onto it, so we're going to see how it starts with our new air mass meter installed. What I'm looking for here is not perfection, because it is cold, it is hard to start, but before, when we would start it cold, when it's been out below 32 degrees, we'd get heavy surging, the car would want to stall, and was basically not good. And that would also translate into the running of the car, like actually driving. So let's see what it does. pretty nice. It's come up, it's sitting at 1,000 RPM. You can see the temperature of the car thinks it is 26 degrees, which is pretty chilly. There's slight movement in the needle on the tach, but really a big difference, huge difference. So yesterday I drove this car quite a bit. I wanted it to relearn its fuel curve. The car is driving really well. Really happy with the changes. Before it used to surge at light throttle at like 50, 55 miles an hour. That's completely gone, and now the cold running is completely done, has fixed. I mean, we got some slight movements in the needle, but like I said, I'm not looking for perfection. It's still a hard start at this temperature. And it looks like we've solved the problem. So even though the part was working and we could see it was working on the scanner and it didn't set a fault code, it was still giving enough of a reading that was out of tolerances for this car to be able to run effectively. Nice and smooth.